So for our first session today, I want to read a few sections from Thomas Merton's book, The New Seeds of Contemplation, where he speaks about this sense of the false self and the true self in a way that talks about our personal identity and links it in with a concept of salvation. We'll talk a little bit more in our second session later about these what he calls the secret identity of the true self, and how the false self is like we wrap ourselves up in bandages. But I want to start with a piece from New Seeds based on a tree, looking at things in their identity is the title of the chapter that this first bit is coming from, although I am jumping around a couple of different chapters. So Merton says this: a tree gives glory to God by being a tree, for in being what God means it to be, it is obeying him. It consists, so to speak, to his creative love. It is expressing an idea which is in God and which is not distinct from the essence of God. And therefore, a tree imitates God by being a tree. The more a tree is like itself, the more it is like him. If it tried to be like something else, which it was never intended to be, it would be less like God, and therefore it would give God less glory. No two created beings are exactly alike, and their individuality is not an imperfection. On the contrary, the perfection of each created thing is not merely in its conformity to an abstract type, but in its own individual identity with itself. This particular tree will give glory to God by spreading its roots in the earth and raising its branches into the air and the light in a way that no other tree before or after it ever did or will do. But what about you? What about me? Unlike the animals and the trees, it is not enough for us to be what our nature simply intends. Our vocation is not simply to be, but to work together with God in the creation of our own life, our own identity, our own destiny. We are free beings, children of God. This means to say that we should not passively exist, but actively participate in his creative freedom in our own lives and in the lives of others by choosing to live in the truth. To put it better, we are even called to share with God the work of creating the truth of our own identity. We can evade this responsibility by playing with masks, and this pleases us because it can appear at times to be a free and creative way of living. It is quite easy, it seems, to please everyone. But in the long run, the cost and the sorrow come very high. To work out our own identity in God, which the Bible calls working out our own salvation, is a labor that requires sacrifice and anguish, risk and many tears. It demands close attention to reality in every moment, and great fidelity to God as God reveals himself obscurely in the mystery of each new situation. We do not know clearly beforehand what the result of this work will be. The secret of my full identity is hidden in him. But if I am true to the concept that God utters in me, if I am true to the thought of him that I was meant to embody, I shall be full of his actuality and find him everywhere in myself and find myself nowhere. I shall be lost in him. That is, I shall find my true self. I shall be saved. So we begin our times today, we begin our thoughts with Thomas Merton on this idea of discovering our true identity, our true self. He speaks of a true identity as something that we need to build with God. God is creating within us. Yesterday we spoke a lot about that transforming, the theosis of becoming one with God, as the Apostle Peter says it, by taking on the divine nature through the kenosis that we spoke of yesterday, the emptying of ourself, as exemplified by Jesus, recorded in Philippians, where it says he emptied himself to become subject to death on the cross. He took out everything that was who he originally was, and that's what we are called to do, to empty the self that we are created. Now, yesterday we spoke a great deal about the construction of the first self, which it comes to be understood as the false self. It is a necessary journey to create who we are based on where we've come from. And it's about our culture, it's about our family, it's about our society, it's about those things which we create in ourselves, and things are put upon us to create who we are. But that isn't who we truly are. And in here, Merton talks about this sense of putting on masks. This is the opposite of, we can evade this responsibility. So we are called to share with God the work of creating the truth of our identity, or our true selves. We can evade this responsibility by playing with masks, that is, creating this false self, this false persona. And one of the best examples these days of this false persona is social media, where people project and present the person that they want everybody else to think they are. So you write down in a list of all the books that you want everybody to know that you've read. You write down a list of all the films that you want everyone to know you've seen. You put on the pictures that make you look good. You take off the pictures very quickly that your friends tag you in where you look terrible. So you present this kind of idealized self. That's what social media is about. Presenting an idealized self. This is not reality as it is, because we all read books that we might be a little bit ashamed of. We all have those guilty pleasure programs and films that we kind of go, I don't want to tell anyone that I watched that, but I really like it. And we all have moments where we don't look gorgeous, but we don't put those things out there, because what we're doing is we're creating this false persona. And this is a fantastic example of what the false self has always been in an internalized context. The trouble comes when we believe that presentation to be who we truly are. When we truly believe that we are the people that we're presenting to the world. That's where the problem comes. And one more quote from Merton says, the obstacle is in our self. This is the false self he's talking about here. That is to say, in the tenacious need to maintain our separate, external, egotistic will. It is when we refer all things to this outward and false self that we alienate ourselves from reality and from God. It is then the false self that is our God, and we love everything for the sake of this self. So for Merton, this presentation, that the belief that this presentation is really us, is actually idolizing this false self. The false self, it then becomes a god. So we have this trouble, he says. This obstacle is that we have this tenacious need to maintain a separate external egotistic will. We have this drive to need to maintain this false self. And it's this drive that causes a lot of divisions and problems. We spoke yesterday again about this sense of the kind of the lower brain, as Richard Rohr calls it, the reptilian brain, the tribal brain, the divisive brain, where we see differences and we have to defend where we are coming from, because those are the things that are our foundations. These false self-projections. This is how it's supposed to be done, because this is how I do it. This is a false self defending itself. And that's when this false self becomes what Merton here calls a god. That is our God. And we love everything for the sake of this false self. We simply start to believe that this is who we are and this is what is right. And that's as Rohr said yesterday, and as Merton says in other places, I don't think I'm bringing it out today, this need to defend is the proof that people are still living from the false self. I put a little quote of my own up on my Facebook today that says the people living from their false self try to change others, whereas people living from the true self try to change themselves. And this is where we're coming from. This is what we need to do. And another quote from Merton says, "In order to become my true self, I must cease to be what I always thought I wanted to be. In order to find myself, I must go out of myself. And in order to live, I have to die. The reason for this is that I am born in selfishness, and therefore my natural efforts to make myself more real and more myself makes me less real and less myself, because they revolve around this lie." So our own efforts to try and create ourselves is a false effort. It makes us less real. It draws us further away from God. The more time and effort we spend on creating the false self, the further we draw ourselves away from our true self. And yesterday, again, we looked at this concept of the being made in the image and likeness of God. The image of God is the core of our being. That is the very essence of who we are as a human being. And Thomas Merton also says in another place that there is this center of our being that is untainted by sin, which is the focus of our entire inner journey to get to that single point, that image of the divine within us. But as many of the mystics from the East and the West traditions say, there's a difference between the image and the likeness of God. We are made in the image and likeness of God, and everything is made in the image of God, but we become the likeness of God by this transformational journey. And so we are therefore part of the journey of becoming our true selves. The more we build the false self, the further we are away from God, even if we're doing it in a kind of a framework of spirituality or religion. And again, this is where some of the problems come within religion, where people are using the framework of religion to build their false self. This is again, you look at the times where people are defending their position on theology or denominations or whatever it is. If you feel the need to have to defend your opinion, particularly if you feel the need to have to change other people's opinions, then here is proof that you're living from the false self. So it's a real danger to frame the journey in construction of the false self around religion and spirituality. Because real spirituality, real journeying into the heart of the divine, is the deconstruction of the false self and the construction of the true self, where we don't feel the need to defend and we don't feel the need to convert others, because we are fully in the understanding that firstly, everybody is on the journey of creating their own true self and getting to their own true self. So everybody's going to think differently. And secondly, that my understanding of truth is not going to necessarily be the same as other people's understanding of truth. So we can share our thoughts. I know what I think, and I'm happy to share with others what I think. In fact, that's what I'm doing now. That's, I've basically made a living out of sharing my thoughts with other people, whether that be through books or talks or courses or whatever. So there's nothing wrong with sharing what you think, but I'm not sharing what I think to try and change your mind and opinion if you think differently. I'm happy for you to think differently. I'm happy for you to disagree with me. It doesn't matter. My own journey is a transformational journey, and I'm part of my understanding, part of my knowledge that I am happy for you to think differently is because I used to think differently to how I think now. I used to think differently about bits of theology than the way I think about them now. I've changed my opinion on certain things. So certain things were presented to me in my upbringing, in my church surroundings, in certain periods of my life, that in later years I've done my own kind of research and study, and I've decided that actually I don't think that what I was taught was correct and accurate. One of those things being that I was brought up in a church that taught that women should keep their mouths shut and keep their hats on, and the men are the ones that are in charge and everything like that. I now no longer think that. I don't think that's what the Bible teaches. I think the Bible has a very different context to those verses, and the same with various other things. However, when I come across people who do think that, I don't then feel the need to have to try and convert them. If they ask my opinion, I will share it. But I don't feel the need to try and change their mind, because I know that we are all on a journey and we are all in different places. And that's fine. So this is part of that understanding of living from the true self, is understanding that everyone is on this transformational journey, so we don't have to defend our point of view. We can have a point of view, but we don't have to feel the need to defend it particularly aggressively and with toxic, Bible verse throwing at people. Like C.S. Lewis said, wasn't it, that if we use the Bible as a weapon, we haven't quite grasped the concept of what it teaches, or something like that. I think I'm summarizing that. So what we have here in these passages that I've read through 4 or 5 different chapters, just chunks of 4 or 5 different chapters from New Seeds of Contemplation, from Thomas Merton, is this idea that we have an identity. We have a true identity within ourselves. This identity is created by God. It is different to other people's identities. And that difference is a positive thing. The tree is a different tree to another tree of its same genre, of its same genus. And it will grow differently. It will grow in a way that's never been seen before and never will be seen again. And we are just like that. So we have our sense of identity. And we have our own individuality, and both of those things are important to establish within ourselves. But we have this responsibility also to work alongside God, to be co-creators with God in our creating of our true self. The deconstruction, the kenosis of our false self, which is necessary to build up, to have an identity. We deconstruct that, and we are co-creators along with the divine in our transformational journey. We don't just sit back passively and let God do stuff. It's not just like sunbathing and our skin going brown or red, depending on how long you stay out for. But actually, it's a process, and we have to be a part of that process. We have a responsibility, and what Merton equates that to is this co-creation with God. Is what the Bible calls working out our salvation. And as this journey continues, we are saved. And again, we spoke yesterday of this concept of a continual present tense. This idea of Mertons of being saved was a continual present tense. It wasn't a one-moment conversion where, on Tuesday the 5th of January 1976, I said this prayer and then I was converted and I was changed. I was a Christian. That's a kind of, some people have a moment in their life where they go, well, that's where it started for me. This wasn't a final moment. It was a beginning of a journey. That was the beginning of the moment where we became co-creators with God in our transformation into our true self from our false self. And so it's a continual present tense. This being saved is a continual present tense, and I believe that's how the Bible describes it as well. It's a continual present tense. It's a journey. We don't become a Christian. We are becoming Christian. Christian being a word that means Christ-like. So we are becoming Christian. It's a continual journey. I have made a decision at some point that, that's how I'm going to frame my spiritual journey. For whatever reason it was, I've decided to frame my spiritual journey in this Christocentric concept. And it might just be because of my culture, it might be because of my upbringing. For me, actually, it was because of an experience that I had. I had a mystical experience, and I encountered the cosmic Christ in a vision. So that was the time, the reason that I've kind of framed my own spiritual journey as a Christocentric journey. But that's just the roots of my journey. This is a continual transformational journey in a changing life, my changing heart. And I am becoming saved. And to do that, what I need to do, as Merton says in that last statement that I read, I have to stop being what I thought I wanted to be. Let me just read that last statement that I read again from Mertons. In order to become my true self, I must cease to be what I always thought I wanted to be. And in order to find myself, I must go out of myself. In order to live, I have to die. And of course, there you recognize biblical terminology. Anyone who wants to save their life will lose it. Anyone who loses their life for my sake will save it, says Jesus. The reason for this is that I am born into selfishness. I am born into this sense of the true self, needing to create this identity. And therefore, my natural efforts to make myself more real and more myself make me less real and less myself, because they revolve around a lie. So I need to stop. Merton says, I need to cease to be what I always thought I wanted to be. And this is the drive, particularly of Western culture, to make something of yourself. And it is the false self that you are making something of in this context. Is to be the best at whatever it is you want to be. It is to be the top at what you want. That is the drive of Western culture. It is actually an intentional feeding of the ego that is the false self. To be the best. I am the best at this. And I am the top at whatever it is. I'm the top at my job. I'm the head of my career, or whatever it is that you're focusing on as a person. And we are judged in our culture by this. So if you're in a career where actually you've chosen to not pursue things like promotion and raises and things like that, because actually you think your mental well-being is more important than the position you hold and the money you make, then actually you're seen as someone who's this is a negative thing. That's seen in a negative light. I remember my father, who was one of the great inspirations in my life in this kind of context, intentionally not going for promotions further than he felt he wanted to go in his job, because he knew that it would take him away from being as involved in his family as he wanted to be. And he didn't want to do that. He had a father who was away from the family a lot, working, making great money, but he felt he would have wanted his father around more. And so he made the choice that he was going to reach a certain level in his career, and he stayed in the same career for the best part of his life. So pretty much all of my life, my memory, until he retired, he was in the same career. And he reached a certain level and went, that's where I want to stop. And he was judged for that. People said, but you've been in this role for the last 20 years. Isn't it time you went on, do something else, get promotion? You're good enough for promotion. And his choice was, no, I don't want to. Because actually it would detract from what I think is important in life. And so therefore we are judged by this cultural context of being the best. We are judged by not wanting to feed and increase our ego when we decide that something is more important. The true self, the journey into the true self, is more important than the building of the ego. And the development of our spiritual awareness and consciousness, our well-being as a holistic being, is more important. We are judged on this. So what we need to do, as Merton says, is we need to make the decision to not be what we thought we wanted to be, or not to be what our culture conditions us to be. What we need to do is to then become co-creators with God, to become our true self. Because the further we try to propagate this false self, the further we go from God, the further we actually go from our true self. And that's the aim, that's the goal in life. If there was a purpose to life, it is to become our most authentic, true self. And that is a lifelong journey. That is a way that is going to take us, our entire being, our entire existence on this earth, to achieve in that. But it is that process. That's what we're aiming for. That's what we want to engage with. So in this introduction from Thomas Merton into the true self, and again, like I said, we'll go on to more later on in our second session, what we discover is we have an identity. We are created as a sense of identity, and the way that we become closest to God, the way that, as Merton says, for a tree gives glory to God by being a tree. It gives most glory to God by being its most authentic self. The more a tree is like itself, the more it is like God. The more we are like our true self, the more we are like God, the more we are engaged with that divine presence. So we have an identity in ourselves, an individual identity, not a uniform identity. And our individuality is part of the intentional, positive aspect of who we are. We are co-creators with God, journeying into our true self, not passive participants. We have to let go of all the things that we thought we wanted to be, all of those drives that culture tells us to have, to focus more on our holistic true self, to be our true selves. This is the journey. This is where Merton brings us. Our problem, he says, comes when we spend time on this false self. It becomes a god to us, and therefore, God cannot be God to us if we have another God. There is an idol in our life. The false self becomes an idol, Merton says. So let me pause there, give you a moment just to think and contemplate, let some of those thoughts settle into you, and then when you feel, or if you feel you have something to share or a question to bring, then please do that and we'll share that together. Bless you. Just take a moment just to contemplate those things.